Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Chrissy Hodges, advocate for OCD, in particular Pure OCD, which is also the name of my memoir, talking about my experience with OCD. I'm a certified peer support specialist working with people worldwide to provide peer support as people are in recovery or contemplating therapy or any point in your recovery. I can meet you where you're at and provide support. I also provide referrals for therapists all over the world. NoCD is an app, and inside that app they have resources. They have the ability for you to connect with other people that have OCD, and they also do telehealth, doing ERP. So for more information about those services and to join the app, check them out at treatmyocd.com. My website is chrissyhodges.com. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I have been on holiday for a little bit, kind of remote. I was outside the real world, I guess. I went to a remote cabin where there was barely any internet and no TV for about 5 days, and I'm gonna tell you that was tough. And I actually kind of want to do a video on it to share a little bit about how that was kind of tough for me, but tonight I'm not going to focus on that. Tonight I want to focus on the holidays. Now here we are. It's about to be the holiday. It's Christmas is early next week. And I know that if you're on the internet, you've seen tons of videos on like mental health on the holidays and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not just jumping on the bandwagon. I really wanted to do this video. I wanted to show up for you. And in all honesty, the holidays are really hard for me, especially Christmas. So I just wanted to share kind of my thoughts and my experience on that in hopes that if it helps you in any way to feel less alone, and if it helps me to feel less alone in sharing that with you, then mission accomplished. So I wanted to touch on a few things that I feel like aren't talked about a lot in these mental health videos, that may be a little bit more specific to OCD, but also the experience of living with mental health and dealing with Christmas either with family or if you're by yourself. Either way can be tough. So along the way, I'll probably share a few snippets of what it's like for me. So Christmas is hard for me. If you know anything about me, if you've read my memoir or anything, you know that I attempted suicide during the Christmas season about 26 years ago. Remember that at that point, there was no internet. I didn't know I have OCD. I'd had it at that point for 12 years. I had no clue. I had no idea what was going on. And I had fallen into such a severe depression. And again, not knowing I had a disorder that could be treated, because I couldn't just go to the internet and be like, why am I having these thoughts? And I didn't even know about treatment I didn't even know what OCD was at that point. So this time of year is always hard for me. There's reminders everywhere, right? I mean, I remember 26 years ago when there were Christmas lights everywhere. And at that point, I was, my dad was a minister, so we would go to church and I would think to myself, why am I depressed and why am I having these thoughts? And, and then the milestones of each Christmas for 12 years had built up for me, this is supposed to be this amazing time and I am miserable and everybody else is happy. And every single Christmas is just one more year that goes by that shows me that I am having these awful, miserable thoughts and it's never going to get better. And so I was at that breaking point with no options, knowing nothing about OCD or that this was even something that could be treated, or that I was, thinking I was the only person in the world walking around with these horrible thoughts. And so this time of year is tough for me. So even just a base of that being tough is hard. I don't really celebrate Christmas. This is the first year I actually have gotten a tree and started to contemplate what the holidays mean to me, which is kind of exciting. And I'm 46, so it's never too late to start looking at things and creating your own traditions and how you can kind of show up for yourself for holidays if that's what you need to be doing. But for many years, there were many years I spent the holidays by myself. I don't like to be with family on the holidays. It's just triggering for me. And I just I don't like to celebrate, and I don't want to be put in that environment where I'm going to be triggered and or it takes me a long time to recover. So this year and in the last few years, one of the things, and I hope that this can be helpful for you if you don't celebrate or if you're not sure what to do, is that I've just created my own traditions for myself. It's one of those things is eating food that I really want to eat, not traditional Christmas food, binge watching things on the day of Christmas, because I take the day off. That's like one of the one days of the year I know I cannot work. I'm not going to open emails. I'm not going to do anything. And that's become exciting for me to look forward to that, to figure out what it is I'm going to watch that day. Maybe I have a little champagne, which I rarely ever drink, but I'll have some champagne in the evening, which is kind of cool to look forward to. And sometimes I put a little bit of like raspberry liqueur in it. So I don't know. It's just fun, and little raspberries on top. And I usually eat sushi, but I don't know if any sushi restaurants where I live now are open. But anyway, just sharing that with y'all. But this year, kind of same thing. I'm super chill, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the obstacles that we may face with OCD. If you're going home to be with family, if you're going somewhere or you decide that you don't want to go, and whether that's part of avoidance or part of obligation or part of the experience of feeling like the holidays are a burden for you or tough, or you're really scared about how it's going to be or how it's going to feel afterwards. So the first thing I want to say is, of course, Christmas is a milestone. Christmas is that, especially because it's the end of the year, rolling into the new year, which the new year, of course, is going to be a reminder of, oh my goodness, one more year has passed and I'm still having these intrusive thoughts. One more year has passed and I'm still feeling depressed, or I'm still feeling this way. Is it ever going to get better? Or reflecting on, oh my gosh, I was worried about these intrusive thoughts 3 years ago and now they're back. I want to remind you, and you may not even really think about it. Going back home, going to visit relatives can be absolutely triggering for your OCD. They can be absolutely triggering for specific OCD thoughts. We don't think about that, right? This is what we do. We grit our teeth and go, please let me go home and not be triggered. Well, what if home is a trigger? Now, that doesn't mean never go home. It just means start to recognize some of the things in your life that when you're exposed to them, certain intrusive thoughts come up. I mean, when I was in high school, I had intrusive thoughts so bad. So when before, when I would go home to the house that I used to live in when I grew up, and I would go home when my mom lived there and I would visit, the smell of that house would bring up the intrusive thoughts, even though I'd had effective therapy for them. My room that I lived in during that time brings up intrusive thoughts. Driving around and remembering places that I was triggered. The same, my mom still had the same sofa from when I was a teenager way back in the day. So when I would go home and see that sofa, it would trigger things. And these are things that we don't think about. We don't look sometimes at OCD as being a pattern. And that when we're exposed to things that can bring those triggers up, all of a sudden, boom, now those intrusive thoughts are back. So as you approach going in to seeing family or seeing people you haven't seen in a long time, and maybe the last time you saw them, you were triggered, or maybe you're experiencing that now, but seeing them or seeing an environment where you were triggered before, maybe exacerbating it, recognize that. So that you're a little bit more prepared of, okay, I'm going to walk into that house, I'm going to smell things, I'm going to see things, I'm going to talk to people, boom. That might be one of the reasons, because the best thing we can do is prepare ourselves for being triggered, even though we don't want to be. So reminders, that is what Christmas can be. That is what New Year's can be. A reminder that you're still dealing with this, a reminder that, that this has been going on for a while. So, just know that you are not alone in that, and that it can be exacerbated not only because of the triggers and the things that you're exposed to, but also because of you being out of your normal routine, you being out of the things that you would you would normally do that kind of, we are very routine oriented with OCD. I'm gonna tell you something, I don't even challenge that shit. I am a routine person, which is why like being at that cabin was at some points a little bit offsetting for me, because I was like, oh, routine. But it is important to get out of that routine as well. But when you're out of your routine, you're more likely to experience things that are going to flare OCD up. So that is also something that can happen. Okay, moving along, because I don't want to make this video way too long. Identified patient. So the identified patient, I don't want to go into this. If you want to know more about it, just Google it. I know I've talked about it before on other videos. Identified patient, the person in the family unit that is struggling with a mental illness, and therefore sometimes that can put a strain on the family unit, and it also creates shame for the person that's experiencing the mental illness. Why? Because we didn't ask for this shit. I didn't ask for a mental illness. And in fact, like, do I think that my family had a role in developing the illness and the symptoms? Hell yes. Hell yes. And many of you may not think that, and that's fine, but I do, and a lot of people do. And so sometimes being back in a family unit, being back in the family environment where you are seen as the identified patient of the family, it's almost like you're taking on this role, right, of being like the mentally ill person, or you're perceived as that, even though it may be 20 something years out, it's still that, or there's trauma around it, or there's unresolved conflict around it. And so sometimes if that's the role that the family has put you in, going back to see family can be difficult. Not only because you may be treated differently by that, but you also may experience shame, and you may experience guilt and embarrassment for having that mental illness, when again, I just want to tell you, it is not your fault. Having a mental illness is not your fault, and being put in a position to be the identified patient in a family is not your fault and should not be happening. And a lot of times that is a reflection of the toxicity of the family unit, and it has nothing to do with you. So if you want to know more about what that is, finding out that I was the identified patient was freeing. I know that it seems like that would feel very victim oriented, and that could go in the direction of in that direction. It didn't for me. It actually, once I defined that role, that helped me to see like, okay, well, that's what's going on, and there's nothing I can do about it except for take care of myself and start to have self-compassion for who I am. So that can be a very empowering thing to know, even though it can also be very grief-worthy. Third, boundaries. Boundaries are so important when it comes to any holiday. First of all, this is your holiday. This isn't anybody else's. I know that there's traditions, but traditions are just ways of, previous generations making you feel guilty. Traditions can be fun, but when traditions are impeding on what you really want to do and you feel like you have to do it, especially if it's causing you distress, man, just you don't have to do that. And in fact, it's easy for us to forget that holidays should also be about us and what we want to do. And sometimes we give that up in order to appease or not to cause conflict and things like that. And then that can roll over into the new year. It can roll over into weeks after just being able to, get back to a place without being triggered or dealing with what may have happened because you didn't put appropriate boundaries in. Now, I'm just going to say boundaries are difficult to set, especially in the face of traditions. But if there's something that you don't want to do, or if it's going to trigger your OCD, or if you're feeling like this is something that's going to make things bad for me, you have every right to say, I am not going to participate. It is okay that I don't do this to protect my mental health. And that's the only thing that we can do, is be empowered to use our voice in order to protect our own mental health, right? We can do that. We can also put boundaries around talking about our mental health, talking about OCD, talking about content, people making jokes, people treating you differently. If you don't want any, like if you're struggling, or if you're not even struggling, but sometimes when you get around family or friends or something, people may bring up your OCD. If you don't want that to happen, you can set that boundary. I do not want to talk about my mental health. Please don't bring up OCD. Please don't ask me about OCD. Please don't ask me about specific things. Please don't reference this. Let's not talk about those memories. You are allowed to set those precedents when it comes to your mental health. In fact, I've said this before in other videos, and I'm going to say it again. You teach people how to support you. You also teach people how to treat you, and this is a big one. You know, people tend to kind of lose all of their faculties when it comes to holidays. You know, it just sometimes just people lose their shit. And often if you are in a position of being the identified patient, that role will come out to then identify your mental illness as something that can be dumped on or something that can be highlighted. Set those boundaries. Set the precedents. We are not going to talk about my mental health. Do not ask me about this. If you want to ask me about this, you can ask me in private, and here's what you can say. Here's what you don't say. Here's what we don't talk about in front of other people. You have a voice. This is your life with OCD, and it's also your recovery. And you have a voice on telling people what they can and can't do around that. And I know that is so scary, but you are strong enough and empowered enough to be able to do that. And especially if it's going to make things easier for you. Lastly, it's okay in going into the holidays, whether you're with family or not, whether you're by yourself or not, it is okay to experience heavy emotions. Jealousy. When you're around family or you're around friends and you are struggling or you have struggled. I mean, I reflect back on my year. I had such a tough year this year. And when I even start to reflect, I just think, oh my God, like some people I hang around, or if I were to go, like, they don't even know what the hell, like they just kind of skirt through life. And I feel jealous sometimes that people don't deal with some of the things that I have to deal with, or I feel angry, right? And you may feel these things. You may feel these heavy emotions, shame, guilt, things like that. It's okay. And just because you're having those emotions doesn't mean you don't love the people that you're with. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't have a great time. If those emotions come up, how can you allow yourself to feel them? Do you need to get away for a minute? Do you need to go take a walk? Do you need to go cry? Do you need to go have a glass of wine? Do you need to take space for yourself and go for a drive? Or do you need to cry with a family member or talk to someone about that? It's okay to experience these things. And in fact, I would encourage you to encourage those emotions. And just know you're not alone. It is very hard for people at Christmas and New Year. Y'all know what I'm talking. You can get those damn cards in the mail, and it is like, look at my family and how wonderful and all the great things that's happened to us over this last year. And I'm sitting here going, wow, well, I just thought about how I was a pedophile half the year. Like, fuck off. I hate those cards. I hate them. I actually want to write back and be like, can you please send a card next year and tell us all the hard things that happened to your family? Because I would way more relate to that. It's okay to have those big emotions. It's okay to feel jealous. It's okay to feel like, man, I've had a tough year, or I've had a tough few years, or things feel bad for me right now, and I wish things could be better. The expectations of holidays can be so tough. You know, expectations for anything with OCD can be so tough. Am I right? Because we just want milestones and these big days to be awesome. And sometimes our brains come in and they have another agenda for us, and we have to go with it. And I'm going to say something. It is not fair. It's not fair. One of the things that I would like you to do, okay? And I have a hard time doing this too, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it right here with you. Is right now, or this Christmas, or at New Year's, you know, when the clock turns over, when the day comes, New Year's Day, reflect back on this last year. Reflect back on the last couple years. Even if you've been struggling, look at where you're at now, even if that means you've made it through. And here you are on this video. Here you are going out and doing something, or here you are staying in and taking care of yourself, or spending time by yourself on this holiday. Whatever you're doing, it is okay. And you're okay. Reflect back on how far you've come, even if you feel like I've gotten worse. Getting worse it doesn't mean that things are always going to be awful. It also just means you've survived. And sometimes, my friends, that is enough with this really, really tough illness. I'm going to reflect myself in this next week or so in all the things that I've gone through in this last year. It has been a very difficult year for me, one of the biggest stretches of growth I've ever had in my life, and I am grateful for it, but it's also painful to remember. And I want to thank you for being there with me every step of the way. Even sometimes I would upload videos when I was just feeling at the lowest point I've sometimes felt in my adult life. What I really appreciate is the consistency of this community and me being part of you and this community and you being part of my life. And I want to thank you for that. So if you need to hang on to anything, any little piece of hope on this holiday season and moving into the next year, you mean something to me and you mean something to this community and you matter. And I just want you to hear that and know that even when things get really dark, because they get dark for me too. And one of the things that gives me the most hope is you. So thank you and happy holidays. And I'll be back next week, probably on Christmas Day, to just send you some love. And I'll talk to you then.